Imagine giving your heart to your first love, only to be left behind when you needed him the most. She was just a quiet, hard-working assistant, a young woman who had never been in love, never even been kissed. He was a powerful, polished millionaire who never looked twice at anyone below his class, until one night changed everything. She gave him her trust, her innocence, and when she got pregnant, he walked away, cold, unbothered, refusing to even believe the child was his. But fate had a different plan, because when he finally saw that baby, everything changed. You won't believe what he did next. This story is about betrayal, power, redemption, and a twist that no one, not even he, saw coming. Thanks for stopping by. Your time here means a world to us. That if you love gripping, emotional stories that hit deep and stay with you, tap that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to feel something real today. Speech balloon. And don't forget, we drop stories like this every week. So hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single one. Now, grab a drink, get comfy, because this story is about to take you on a ride you won't forget. Let's get into it. What happens when a powerful businessman's world collides with the innocence of a small-town girl? When wealth meets purity and experience faces untouched hearts. This is a story that will challenge everything you believe about love, responsibility, and second chances. By the way, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you're ready for an emotional roller coaster that will leave you questioning the very nature of love itself, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories. Now, let's dive into a tale that proves love knows no boundaries. The Chicago skyline glittered like scattered diamonds against the October night, its lights reflecting off the floor. Toe-ceiling windows of Michael Thompson's Lincoln Park penthouse. At 42, Michael had built an empire from concrete and steel, his construction company, transforming the city's landscape one skyscraper at a time. Tonight, however, success felt heavier than usual on his broad shoulders. He loosened his Italian silk tie as he stepped to a mahogany front door, his tailored charcoal suit bearing the wrinkles of another 18-hour day. The deal with Meridian Corporation had finally closed. A $50 million contract that would secure his company's future for the next 5 years. Yet instead of celebration, exhaustion coursed through his veins like lead. "Good evening, Mr. Thompson." The voice was soft, almost musical, carrying the faintest trace of a Midwestern accent that seemed out of place in a sophisticated urban world. Michael's steel-gray eyes lifted to find Emily Johnson standing in the pristine marble foyer, her delicate hands clasped in front of her simple navy dress. At 19, she possessed a natural beauty that expensive cosmetics couldn't replicate. Auburn hair that caught the light like burnished copper, emerald eyes that sparkled with genuine warmth, and a smile that seemed to illuminate the entire room. For months, Emily had been part of his household staff, arriving each morning before dawn and leaving after he'd retreated to his home office. She was a ghost in his peripheral vision, efficient and invisible, exactly how he preferred his domestic help. But tonight something was different. Perhaps it was the way the ambient lighting caught the gentle curve of her cheekbone, or how her presence seemed to fill the cavernous space with unexpected life. The house looked immaculate as always, Michael heard himself saying, his voice softer than intended. "Have you eaten dinner?" Emily's cheeks flushed a delicate pink, her eyes widening with surprise. In all the months she'd worked for him, their conversations had never extended beyond polite acknowledgments and basic instructions about household management. "I know, sir. I was just finishing up in the kitchen before heading home." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture that Michael found oddly endearing. "Join me for dinner." The words escaped before his rational mind could intervene. "I'd appreciate the company tonight." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of her tiny studio apartment in Bucktown, where leftover soup and textbook reading awaited her. She thought of her education classes at DePaul University, where she was pursuing her dream of becoming an elementary school teacher. Most of all, She thought of her parents back in Meadowbrook, Kansas, Mary and Robert Johnson, who'd raised her with strong Christian values and unwavering faith in the goodness of people. That's very kind, Mr. Thompson, but I wouldn't want to impose. Emily, her name on his lips sounded different, intimate somehow. Please. Something in his tone, vulnerable, almost pleading, made her decision. I'd be honored. As they settled in the dining room, the crystal chandelier casting prismatic rainbows across the mahogany table. Emily felt like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. The bone china was worth more than her monthly salary, the silverware heavier than anything she'd ever held. Yet Michael's presence across from her made the opulent space feel strangely cozy. Tell me about yourself, Michael said, studying her face as if seeing her for first time. What brought you to Chicago? Emily's fingers nervously traced the rim of her wine glass. Her first taste of alcohol, the burgundy liquid foreign on her tongue. I grew up in Meadowbrook, Kansas. Population 123, well 122 now that I'm here. She smiled self-consciously. I'm studying elementary education at DePal. I want to go back home someday and teach at the school where I learned to read. That's admirable, Michael said, and he meant it. When was the last time he met someone with such pure intentions? Your parents must be proud. A shadow crossed Emily's face. They don't know about this. She gestured around the lavish room. They think I'm working at a coffee shop near campus. They wouldn't understand why I needed to clean houses to pay for school. Why didn't you take out loans like other students? Because debt feels like chains, Emily replied without hesitation. My father always said that owing money to strangers is a first step toward losing your soul. Michael nearly choked on his wine. His entire business model was built on leveraging debt, on calculated risks and strategic borrowing. Yet there was something refreshing about her perspective, like a cool breeze through his overheated world of corporate machinations. As the evening progressed, their conversation flowed with surprising ease. Emily spoke of her hometown with such vivid affection that Michael could almost smell the wheat fields and hear the church bells of Meadowbrook Methodist. In return, he found himself sharing stories of his own journey, the construction company he'd built from nothing, the satisfaction of seeing his buildings reshape the skyline, the loneliness that success had unexpectedly brought. Do you ever regret leaving home? Michael asked as they shared a dessert of chocolate, mousse that Emily approached with the wonder of a child at Christmas. Every day, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. But dreams sometimes require distance from the people we love most. Something shifted in Michael's chest, a tectonic movement he couldn't quite identify. Here was a girl, a woman, he corrected himself, who'd left everything familiar to chase an education, working, jobs at others, might consider beneath them, all while maintaining an optimism that seemed to glow from within. As a grandfather, clock in the hallway chimed 11. Reality began to intrude. Emily rose from her chair, smoothing her dress with those graceful hands. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Thompson. It was the most wonderful evening I've had since coming to Chicago. Michael, he said, standing as well. Call me Michael. They faced each other in the golden light of the dining room, the air between them crackling with unspoken possibility. Michael could smell her perfume, something simple and floral that reminded him of spring mornings. Emily could feel the intensity of his gaze like a physical touch, her cheeks burning with a combination of excitement and confusion. Emily, Michael said, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. As she stepped closer, her emerald eyes searching his face. At 19, she'd never felt anything like the electricity coursing through her veins, the way her entire body seemed to lean toward this complicated, powerful man who'd shown her such unexpected kindness. I should go, she whispered, but made no move. Toward the door. Should you? Michael's hand reached up to touch her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with infinite gentleness. Emily's eyes fluttered closed at the contact, her breath catching in her throat. She thought of her parents, of the values they'd instilled in her, of the promise she'd made to herself to remain pure until marriage. But she also thought of the loneliness in Michael's eyes, the way he'd listened to her dreams as if they mattered, the feeling that perhaps God had brought them together for a reason she couldn't yet understand. When she opened her eyes, Michael was studying her with intensity that made her knees weak. "I've never," she began, then stopped, her cheeks flooding with color. Understanding dawned in Michael's expression, followed quickly by something that looked like panic. "Emily, we shouldn't." "Why not?" The question escaped her lips before she could stop it, surprising them both with its boldness. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, humming with possibility and danger. Michael's hand still cupped Emily's cheek, his thumb tracing patterns on her soft skin, as if memorizing every detail. The logical part of his mind screamed warnings. She was his employee. She was 19. She was innocent in ways he'd forgotten existed. But the part of him that had been hollow for so long ached with an unfamiliar hunger for connection, because he said finally, his voice, "Once we cross this line, there's no going back." Emily's heart thundered against her ribs, but her gaze never wavered from his. "Maybe I don't want to go back." The words hung in the air like a confession, like a prayer, like a declaration of war against everything sensible. Michael searched her face for any sign of doubt, any flicker of uncertainty he could use as an excuse to step away, to return to the safe distance that had defined their relationship until tonight. Instead, he found only determination mixed with the kind of trust that made his chest tighten painfully. "Emily," he whispered, her name a benediction on his lips. "Are you certain?" She answered by rising on her tiptoes, her lips brushing his with the tentative sweetness of someone who'd never kissed a man before. The contact sent shockwaves through Michael's system, every nerve ending suddenly alive with sensation. He'd kissed countless women, sophisticated creatures who knew exactly what they wanted and how to get it, but nothing had prepared him for the devastating innocence of Emily's touch. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Emily's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "But not of you. I'm scared of missing this chance, of wondering forever what could have been." Michael's resolve crumbled like sand. With infinite care, he took her hand and led her toward the stairs, each step echoing through the silent house like a heartbeat. Emily followed, her fingers intertwined with his, her mind spinning with the magnitude of what was about to happen. His bedroom was a study in masculine elegance, dark wood, rich fabrics and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Lake Michigan. But Emily barely noticed the core. Her entire world had narrowed to the man standing before her, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for the zipper of her dress. "We can stop," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "At any point, we can stop." Emily's response was to help him with the zipper, her movements awkward but determined as the fabric whispered to floor. Michael's breath caught in his throat. She was more beautiful than he'd imagined, curves and valleys painted in moonlight and shadow, her skin luminous as pearl. "You're perfect," he breathed, and meant it with a sincerity that surprised them both. What followed was a gentle storm of sensation and emotion. Michael, with all his experience, had never made love to someone whose every response was new, whose gasps and sighs were born of genuine wonder rather than practiced performance. Emily, overwhelmed by feelings she'd never imagined, gave herself completely, not just her body, but something deeper, something sacred, that she'd guarded for 19 years. When it was over, they lay entwined in the twisted sheets, Emily's head resting on Michael's chest as his fingers combed through her hair. The weight of what had happened settled over them gradually, like snow falling on a winter landscape. "I should probably get home," Emily said softly, though she made no move to leave the circle of his arms. "Stay," Michael replied, the word escaping before he could consider its implications. "Please." Emily lifted her head to look at him, her hair cascading around her shoulders like a copper waterfall. "Are you sure?" Instead of answering with words, Michael pulled her closer, sealing his lips over hers in a kiss that tasted of promises. Neither of them was ready to make. Emily melted into him, her body fitting against his, as if she'd been created specifically for this moment. This man, this perfect storm of circumstance and desire. As dawn painted the Chicago skyline in shades of rose and gold, Emily slept peacefully in Michael's arms, her breathing soft and even against his chest. But Michael remained, awake, staring at the ceiling as the reality of what he'd done began to crash over him like waves against a breakwater. He was 42 years old, established, powerful, and he just slept with his 19-year-old housekeeper, a virgin, no less. The word echoed in his mind with increasing horror. He had taken something precious from someone pure, someone who trusted him completely. What had he been thinking? What kind of man was he to take advantage of a girl young enough to be his daughter, someone who worked for him, someone who depended on him for a livelihood? As Emily stirred in his arms, a soft smile playing on her lips, even in sleep, Michael felt something cold and hard settle in his stomach. This had been a mistake, a beautiful, devastating mistake that could ruin both their lives. Carefully, so as not to wake her, Michael extracted himself from bed and pulled on his robe. He moved to his desk and, with hands that shook slightly, began to write a note. Each word felt like a small betrayal, but he told himself it was necessary, that he was protecting them both from something that could only end in disaster. When Emily woke an hour later, the bed beside her was empty and cold. Sunlight streamed to the windows, illuminating a single sheet of paper on the pillow where Michael's head had been. With trembling fingers, she unfolded the note and read, "Emily, last night was a mistake that should not have happened. I've left a check on the kitchen counter. Consider a bonus for your excellent service. Please collect your things and consider your employment terminated effective immediately. I think it's best if we don't see each other again. Monsieur Thompson." The paper fluttered to the floor as Emily's world tilted on its axis. The beautiful, terrifying thing that had bloomed between them was being crushed before it could even take root. She thought of her parents' faces, of the shame that would consume her if they knew what she'd done, of the dreams that suddenly seemed impossibly far away. Emily's hands shook as she dressed in yesterday's clothes. The navy dress that had seemed so appropriate for dinner now feeling like a costume from someone else's life. Every movement sent reminders through her body of what had transpired between them, the tender way Michael had touched her, the reverent whispers of her name, the moment when she'd given him something she could never reclaim, and now, in the harsh light of morning, it had all been reduced to a mistake worthy of termination. She found a check in the kitchen as promised, more money than she'd make in 3 months. The zeros dancing before her eyes like a cruel joke. The crisp paper felt like shame in her hands, like payment for services rendered, and she crumpled it immediately, her stomach churning with humiliation. Emily gathered her few personal belongings from the supply closet, a small photo of her parents, a spare sweater, her worn copy of The Kill, a mockingbird that she read during breaks. Each item felt heavier than it should, weighted with the memory of innocence lost and trust betrayed. As she reached the front door, her phone buzzed with a text message from her roommate, Jessica. "How was work? You're usually home by now." Emily stared at the words, unable to formulate a response that wouldn't unravel everything. How could she explain that in the span of 12 hours, she'd experienced the most beautiful and most devastating night of her life? How could she face Jessica's questions when she couldn't even process what had happened herself? The train ride back to Bucktown passed in a blur of motion and regret. Emily pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the city wake up around her. Commuters rushing to work, children walking to school, life continuing its normal rhythm while her world had fundamentally shifted. Meanwhile, Michael sat in his office 40 floors above the city, staring at contracts that might as well have been written in ancient Greek. The words swam before his eyes, meaningless symbols that couldn't hold his attention. when all he could think about was the look on Emily's face when she'd whispered his name in the darkness. His phone buzzed. Constantly. Contractors needing approval. Investors wanting updates. His assistant reminding him of a lunch meeting with city planners. But each ring felt like an intrusion, a demand. For normally he wasn't ready to provide. Sir, his assistant Margaret appeared in the doorway, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. The Meridian executives are here for the 9 o'clock. Michael looked at his watch. 9:15. He'd completely forgotten about the follow-up meeting for yesterday's contract signing. Send them in. The next 2 hours passed in a haze of technical discussions and financial projections. Michael nodded at appropriate moments. Signs were indicated, but his mind remained fixed on the memory of Emily's trust, the way she looked at him like he was something precious rather than predatory. When the executives finally left, Michael found himself alone with thoughts that provided no comfort. He'd done the right thing, he told himself. Emily was 19, impressionable, working her way through college with dreams of teaching children. He was a 42-year-old businessman with a reputation to maintain and responsibilities that left little room for emotional complications. But if he'd done the right thing, why did his chest feel hollow, as if something essential had been carved out and discarded? His phone rang, startling him from his brooding. The caller ID showed his ex-wife's number, and Michael's blood ran cold. Amanda only called when she needed something, usually related to their bitter divorce. Settlement. What do you want, Amanda? He answered without preamble. Such warmth, Michael. No wonder our marriage was such a success. Her voice carried the familiar edge of sarcasm that had characterized their final years. Together, I'm calling about the charity gala next week. You promised to attend, and I need to confirm numbers. Michael rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. I'll be there. Wonderful. Try not to bring some young gold digger this time. The last one you dated was barely older than my nephew. The comment hit closer to home than Amanda could have intended, and Michael's grip tightened on the phone. I'll attend alone. Even better, maybe people will stop talking about your obvious midlife crisis. After ending the call, Michael stared out his office. Windows at the city sprawling below. Was that what last night had been? A midlife crisis played out with an innocent girl who deserved so much better? The thought made his stomach clench with self-loathing. Across town, Emily sat in her American literature class. Professor Williams, discussing the themes of loss and redemption in the Scarlet Letter, but the words felt like physical blows. Hester Prynne's shame and isolation seemed to reach across centuries to mock Emily's situation. Miss Johnson, Professor Williams's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. What's your interpretation of Hawthorne's treatment of guilt in this passage? Emily's cheeks burned as 20 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Guilt is something that transforms people, she said slowly, her voice barely steady. Sometimes it destroys them, but sometimes it teaches them who they really are underneath all the pretense. Excellent observation, the professor replied, but Emily barely heard the praise. Her words felt like prophecy, like a road map for whatever came next. After class, she walked aimlessly through Lincoln Park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath her feet like broken promises. The neighborhood was familiar. She'd passed through it countless times on her way to Michael's penthouse, but now it felt foreign, as if the geography itself had shifted to accommodate her new reality. Her phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. I'm getting worried. Where are you? Emily typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on. Lost my job. Taking a walk to clear my head. The response came immediately. OMG, what happened? Come home. I'll make tea and we'll figure this out. Tea? As if anything could be fixed with chamomile and sympathy. But Emily found herself turning toward home anyway, drawn by the promise of friendship and normally, even if she could never share the full truth of her disgrace. As she walked, Emily pressed a hand to her abdomen, a gesture born of instinct rather than knowledge. Something felt different, though she couldn't name what. a sense of change. That went deeper than heartbreak, deeper than betrayal. 6 weeks had passed since that night. 6 weeks of Emily, throwing herself into her studies with desperate intensity, while carefully avoiding the Lincoln Park neighborhood. Entirely, she found a new job at a bookstore near campus. Less money, but the smell of paper and ink provided comfort that glass cleaner and marble polish never had. Jessica had stopped, asking questions after Emily's carefully constructed story about being let go due to budget cuts, though her concerned glances suggested she suspected more than Emily was sharing. Their tiny studio apartment felt smaller each day, Emily's grief and confusion expanding to fill every corner. It was during a particularly difficult day. She'd received a rejection letter from the student teaching program due to incomplete financial documentation that Emily first noticed the changes in her body, the fatigue that went beyond stress, the way certain smells made her stomach lurch, the tender fullness in her breasts that had nothing to do with her menstrual cycle, which she realized, with growing horror, was now 3 weeks late. Emily sat on the bathroom floor of their apartment, staring at the pregnancy tests in her trembling hands as if she could will the results to change. 2 pink lines stared back at her with unwavering certainty, each one a verdict that would reshape her entire future. Pregnant at 19, unmarried, unemployed, from her primary source of income, and carrying a child of man who discarded her like yesterday's newspaper. The sob that escaped her throat was raw, primal, the sound of a life plan disintegrating in real time. She thought of her parents in Meadowbrook, their faces that would crumple with disappointment and shame. She thought of her education degree, the classroom full of children she dreamed of teaching, the future that suddenly seemed impossibly distant. Most of all, she thought of Michael, the way he touched her with such reverence, the promises his eyes had made even if his words hadn't, the brutal coldness of his dismissal. How would she tell him? How could she face the man who'd made it clear that their night together was nothing more than a regrettable lapse in judgment? For 3 days, Emily carried the secret like a stone in her chest, mechanically attending classes and working at the bookstore, while her mind spun through impossible scenarios. She considered not telling Michael at all, handling the situation alone somehow. She considered calling her parents, confessing everything, and returning to Meadowbrook to face the consequences. But on Thursday evening, as she arranged, a display of children's books and watched the young father read Goodnight Moon to his toddler daughter, Emily knew what she had to do. The child inside her, barely the size of a raspberry, according to pregnancy app she'd downloaded, deserved better than secrets and shame. Michael deserved to know, regardless of how he chose to respond. That night, Emily stood outside the sleek glass building that housed Thompson Construction, watching the lights in Michael's office window, as she'd done countless times when arriving for work. The security guard, recognizing her despite the weeks of absence, nodded her through with a kindly smile that made her chest tighten with nostalgia. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt eternal. Each floor marking another second to change her mind, another opportunity to flee back to the relative safety of uncertainty. But Emily remained rooted in place, her hand pressed protectively over her still flat stomach. Michael's office door was open, revealing him hunched over architectural blueprints, his shirt sleeves rolled up and his dark hair slightly mussed from running his fingers through it. The sight of him sent a complex cascade of emotions through Emily's system, love, anger, longing, and terror mixing into something unnameable. Michael, his name escaped her lips as barely more than a whisper, but his head snapped up as if she'd shouted. For a moment, neither of them moved. Michael's face cycled through surprise, guilt, and something that might have been relief before settling into a carefully neutral expression. Emily remained in the doorway, suddenly unsure of her decision to come here. Emily. He stood slowly, his hands braced against the desk as if he needed the support. You shouldn't be here. I know. Emily stepped into the office, closing the door behind her with quiet finality. But we need to talk. Michael's eyes searched her face, taking in the new hollows beneath her cheekbones, the shadows under her eyes, the way she held herself with fragility that hadn't been there before. Guilt crashed over him in waves. Guilt for what he'd done. Guilt for how he'd handled it. Guilt for the obvious pain his actions had caused. "I'm sorry," he said. The words, inadequate but necessary. "The way I ended things, I handled it badly." "You handled it like a coward," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to spill over. "But that's not why I'm here." Something in her tone made Michael's chest tighten with foreboding. Emily moved to the chair, across from his desk, sitting with the careful precision of someone trying to maintain control. "I'm pregnant, Michael." The words hit him like a physical blow, all the air rushing from his lungs as if he'd been sucker punched. Michael gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white with the force of his hold. "What did you say?" "I'm pregnant," Emily repeated, her voice stronger now that the secret was finally spoken. "About 6 weeks along," which means she didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew exactly when conception had occurred. Michael sank into his chair, his mind reeling. Pregnant. Emily was pregnant with his child. The girl he dismissed as a mistake. The woman whose trust he'd shattered with his cruelty was carrying his baby. "Are you certain?" The question was automatic, born of shock rather than doubt. Emily's eyes flashed with hurt and anger. "I've taken 3 tests, Michael. I'm certain." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of traffic 40 floors below. Michael stared at Emily as if seeing her for the first time. This brave, broken girl who'd walked back into his life to deliver news that would change everything. "What do you want to do?" he asked finally, his voice carefully controlled. Emily's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "I don't know yet, but I thought you had a right to know." Michael nodded, though his thoughts were chaotic. A baby with Emily. The implications crashed over him like dominoes. His reputation, his business relationships, the media scrutiny that would inevitably follow. A successful businessman impregnating his teenage housekeeper would be tabloid gold. But beneath the panic and professional concern, something else stirred. Something that might have been wonder or terror, or the beginnings of an emotion he wasn't ready to name. "We need to discuss this properly," Michael said, standing and moving around the desk. "Not here. Can you would you have dinner with me tomorrow? We need to figure out what happens next." Emily studied his face, searching for any sign of the tenderness she glimpsed that night 6 weeks ago. Instead, she found only the careful composure of a businessman negotiating a difficult deal. "All right," she agreed, rising from her chair. "But Michael, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to fix this for me or to rescue me or to take responsibility you don't want. I just needed you to know." As Emily reached the door, Michael's voice stopped her. "Emily." She turned back, and for a moment his mask slipped, revealing the conflicted man beneath. "Thank you for telling me." She nodded once, then disappeared into the hallway, leaving Michael alone with the blueprints and the devastating knowledge that his life had just taken a turn from which there would be no going back. The restaurant Michael chose for their dinner was quietly elegant, the kind of place where conversations could be held without fear of eavesdropping, where the lighting was soft enough to hide the strain in both their faces. Emily arrived first, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she studied the menu, without really seeing the words. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a simple black dress that skimmed her knees, professional but not severe, an attempt to project maturity beyond her 19 years. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was trying to look older for a conversation about becoming a mother. Michael appeared in the doorway precisely on time, his eyes scanning the restaurant until they found her. He looked older somehow, lines of stress etched around his eyes that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. As he approached the table, Emily felt her heart rate accelerate despite her determination to remain composed. "Thank you for coming," he said, settling into the chair across from her. His voice was formal, careful, the tone he might use with a business associate rather than the woman carrying his child. Of course, Emily's response was equally measured, though her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. They ordered without much attention to the menu, both too focused on the conversation ahead to care about food. When the waiter retreated, an uncomfortable silence settled between them, like a third presence at the table. "I've been thinking," Michael began, his fingers drumming against the tablecloth, "about options, about what might be best for both of us." Emily's spine straightened. "What kind of options?" Michael's pause was infinite, decimal, but she caught it, the hesitation of a man preparing to say something he knew would hurt. "There are procedures, clinics. It would be clean, simple. No one would need to know." The words hit Emily like physical blows, each one striking against the values her parents had instilled in her, against the life growing inside her body, against whatever foolish hope she'd harbored that Michael might somehow want this child. An abortion. She said the word clearly, letting it hang in the air between them. It would solve everything. Michael continued, his businessman's mind already working through the logistics. "You could continue your education without interruption. I could provide financial support. Make sure you have everything you need. It would be as if nothing ever happened," Emily finished, her voice dangerously quiet. "As if I never existed in your life at all." Michael flinched at the accuracy of her assessment. "Emily, be practical. You're 19 years old. You're trying to finish college, build a career. Her baby would derail all of that, would it?" Emily's eyes blazed with fire Michael had never seen before. "Or would it just be inconvenient for you? Bad for your image to have a pregnant teenager as your dirty little secret?" "That's not," Michael started, but Emily cut him off. "I grew up in a town where people still believe in right and wrong, Michael, where actions have consequences that you don't just dispose of when they become inconvenient." Her voice carried the steady strength of her Midwestern upbringing, values as solid as the wheat fields of her childhood. "I may have made mistakes, but I won't compound them by taking a life." Michael's jaw tightened. "You're letting emotion cloud your judgment. Think about what this means for your future, for your family. What will your parents say when they find out their daughter is pregnant and unmarried?" The question struck home, and Emily's composure cracked slightly. She thought of Mary and Robert Johnson, their faces that would fall with disappointment, their congregation's whispers that would follow them for years. But she also thought of the tiny heartbeat that would begin in just a few weeks, the child who deserved a chance regardless of the circumstances of conception. "They'll be disappointed," she admitted, her voice softer now. "They'll be hurt and confused and probably angry. But they raised me to take responsibility for my choices, and that's what I intend to do." Michael leaned back in his chair, studying Emily's face with a mixture of frustration and something that might have been admiration. Her resolve was absolute, unshakable in a way that both impressed and terrified him. "And if I'm not interested in being a father," he asked bluntly, "if I want no part of this?" Emily was quiet for a long moment, her eyes focused on her untouched wine glass. When she looked up, her expression was achingly vulnerable but determined. "Then I'll do it alone," she said simply. "I didn't come here expecting you to rescue me or to suddenly want a family. I came because you deserve to know, and because this baby deserves to know where it came from, even if you choose not to be part of its life." The waiter appeared with their entree, the interruption providing a brief respite from the intensity of their conversation. Both picked at their food without appetite, the weight of unspoken emotions filling the space between them. "I could provide financial support," Michael said finally. "Child support, medical expenses, education costs. But I wouldn't want any public acknowledgement, any legal claim on my name or my estate." Emily's fork paused, halfway to her mouth. "You want to pay me to keep quiet about your involvement." "I want to ensure the child is provided for while protecting both our privacy," Michael corrected, though the distinction felt flimsy even to him. "How generous of you," Emily said, setting down her fork with deliberate care, to support your child while denying its existence. Emily, please try to understand. No, Michael, you try to understand. Emily's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby tables before she caught herself and lowered it again. This isn't a business transaction. This is a human being we created together, whether it was planned or not. And I won't let you treat our child like some kind of inconvenient expense to be managed from a distance. Michael felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition of Emily's fierce protectiveness that reminded him why he'd been drawn to her in the first place. Her passion, her unwavering moral compass, her ability to see clearly through the compromises and justifications that had become second nature to him. What do you want from me? He asked, and for the first time that evening, his voice carried genuine emotion rather than careful calculation. Emily met his gaze steadily. I want you to be honest with me, with yourself, with whatever happens next. I want you to acknowledge that this child is part of both of us, not just an inconvenience, to be managed. And I want you to decide whether you're going to be the kind of man who takes responsibility for his actions or the kind who pays others to pretend they never happened. The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down, demanding a response that would define not just their future relationship, but Michael's fundamental character. As Emily reached for her purse, preparing to leave, Michael felt the ground shifting beneath. Everything he thought he knew about himself. Emily, wait. The desperation in his voice surprised them both. I need time to think about this, about all of it. She paused, her hand on her purse strap. How much time? A week, Michael said. Give me a week to figure out what kind of man I want to be. Emily studied his face for a long moment, searching for sincerity beneath the layers of confusion and fear. Finally, she nodded. 1 week, Michael, but understand this. I'm going to have this baby whether you're a part of his life or not. The only question is whether you're going to be a father or just a name on a birth certificate. Michael's week of contemplation began with sleepless nights and distracted days, his carefully ordered world tilting on its axis as he grappled with Emily's ultimatum. He found himself driving aimlessly through Chicago's streets, past the neighborhoods where he'd built his reputation, past the construction sites that bore his company's name, searching for answers in the familiar landscape of his success. On Tuesday, he found himself parked outside a small playground in Lincoln Park, watching children chase each other across monkey bars and down slides while their parents chatted on nearby benches. A little girl with a hair so similar to Emily's caught his attention as she helped a younger boy reach the swing set, her small face serious with concentration. For the first time, Michael tried to imagine himself as one of those parents. Tried to picture a child with Emily's eyes and his stubborn chin. The image was both terrifying and strangely compelling, like looking at a future he'd never allowed himself to consider. Meanwhile, Emily threw herself into her studies with renewed intensity, as if academic achievement could somehow compensate for the chaos her personal life had become. But her focus was scattered, her mind constantly drifting to the conversation with Michael, to the week that felt like a lifetime of uncertainty. Jessica had finally cornered her Wednesday evening, armed with chamomile tea and the determination to extract the truth from her obviously struggling roommate. Okay, enough, Jessica announced, settling on Emily's bed with the authority of a best friend who'd reached her limit of polite concern. You've been walking around like a ghost for weeks. You barely eat. You stare at your textbooks like they're written in hieroglyphics. And yesterday I caught you crying over a commercial for baby food. What is really going on? Emily looked at her friend, sweet, optimistic Jessica from suburban Denver, whose biggest life crisis had been choosing between marketing and communications as a major, and felt the enormous gulf between their experiences. How could she explain the weight of carrying a child whose father saw her as a mistake to be managed? I can't tell you everything, Emily said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. But I'm pregnant. Jessica's mug of tea stopped halfway to her lips, her eyes widening with shock. You're pregnant. But Emily, you've never even, when did you? It's complicated, Emily said. The understatement of the century. Is it the guy from your old job? The one you never talked about? Jessica's mind was already working, connecting dots. Emily hadn't realized she'd left visible. Emily's silence was answer enough. Oh, honey. Jessica set down her tea and pulled Emily into a fierce hug. What are you going to do? I'm going to have the baby, Emily said, the words becoming easier each time she spoke them. I'm going to figure out how to finish school and work and be a mother, and I'm going to do it whether anyone else thinks it's possible or not. What about the father? Emily's laugh was hollow. He's deciding whether he wants to be involved. I gave him a week to figure out if he can handle having a child with someone like me. Someone like you? Jessica pulled back, her face fierce with indignation. Emily, you're one of the most incredible people I know. You're smart and kind and determined, and any man would be lucky to Jessica. Emily's voice was gentle but firm. It's not that simple. He's older, established, important, and I'm just the girl who used to clean his house. The full picture began to coalesce in Jessica's mind, and her expression shifted from confusion to understanding to anger. Emily, please tell me this. Wasn't some kind of situation where you felt pressured? Or, no, Emily said quickly. It wasn't like that. It was beautiful, actually, which is what makes everything else so much worse. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Emily's situation settling between them like a physical presence. Do you love him? Jessica asked softly. Emily closed her eyes, remembering Michael's hands in her hair, the way he'd looked at her during dinner, as if she were something precious and rare. I thought I did. Maybe I still do. But love doesn't seem to matter much when the other person thinks you're just a mistake that needs to be cleaned up. Across town, Michael was having his own difficult conversation with his business partner and closest friend, David Chun. They sat in David's office, the Chicago skyline, glittering beyond the windows as Michael nursed his third scotch, and tried to explain the inexplicable. Let me get this straight, David said, his normally unflappable demeanor showing cracks of disbelief. You slept with your 19-year-old housekeeper, fired her the next morning, and now she's pregnant with your child. When you put it like that, it sounds like every cautionary tale about powerful men and poor judgment that's ever been written. David interrupted. Michael, what were you thinking? I wasn't thinking, Michael admitted, the scotch loosening his tongue. I was feeling, which apparently I'm spectacularly bad at. David leaned back in his chair, studying his friend with a mixture of concern and exasperation. They'd known each other for 15 years, had built their company from nothing into Chicago powerhouses, had navigated the treacherous waters of business and divorce and success together. Tell me about her, David said finally. Really, tell me, what is she? Like, Michael was quiet for a long moment, his fingers tracing patterns on a glass tumbler. She's extraordinary. Young, yes, but not in the way you'd expect. She has this moral clarity that cuts through all the we surround ourselves with. She's working her way through college to become a teacher, wants to go back to her hometown in Kansas and educate kids who probably can't afford proper supplies. You sound like you admire her. I do, Michael said, surprised by his own honesty. She makes me want to be a better man than I actually am, and yet you fired her and suggested she get an abortion. Michael flinched. I was protecting her, protecting both of us. The scandal alone would destroy her reputation, and probably mine, too. Or you were protecting yourself and convincing yourself it was noble, David suggested. Michael, I've watched you make tough decisions for years. You're not usually this conflicted unless your heart is involved. My heart? Michael laughed bitterly. David, she's 19 years old. What could I possibly offer her except complications and regret? Maybe that's not your decision to make, David replied. Maybe the question isn't what you can offer her, but whether you're brave enough to find out what you could build together. The words hit Michael like cold water, clarifying thoughts. that had been muddled by fear and preconception. He thought of Emily's face when she told him about the pregnancy, not pleading or manipulative, but simply honest. She hadn't asked him to marry her or support her or even acknowledge the child publicly. She'd asked him to be honest about what kind of man he wanted to be. "What would you do?" Michael asked. David was quiet for a moment, considering. I'd asked myself whether I was more afraid of the scandal or of missing the chance to be part of something real for the first time in my life. As Michael drove home to the quiet streets, David's words echoed in his mind. The week Emily had given him was almost over, and he was no closer to a decision than he'd been at the restaurant. But perhaps that wasn't entirely true. Perhaps buried beneath his fear and his practical concerns and his ingrained habit of choosing safety over vulnerability, he already knew what he wanted to do. The question was whether he had the courage to do it. Sunday arrived with an unseasonable warmth that had Chicagoans flooding the parks and lakefront, grasping at what might be the last gentle day before winter's grip tightened on the city. Emily sat in Lincoln Park, the same park where Michael had watched children play earlier that week, her hand resting unconsciously on her still flat stomach, as she tried to prepare for whatever decision he'd reached. The morning sickness had intensified over the past few days, leaving her queasy and exhausted. But there was something else, too, a strange sense of protectiveness that surprised her with its intensity. This tiny cluster of cells growing inside her already felt like someone worth fighting for, someone worth the upheaval of her carefully planned life. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Can we meet at the coffee shop on Clark Street near your bookstore?" Emily's heart hammered against her ribs as she typed back, "I'll be there in 20 minutes. The coffee shop was busy with Sunday afternoon regulars, but Michael had secured a corner table away from the worst of the noise. He looked different somehow, less polished than usual, his hair slightly mused and his shirt wrinkled as if he'd slept in it. When Emily approached, he stood with the careful courtesy that had been drilled into him since childhood, but his eyes held an uncertainty she'd never seen before. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice rougher than usual. Emily sat across from him, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands fidgeted with his coffee cup. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," Michael admitted. "Not properly, anyway. This week has been illuminating." Emily waited, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure he must hear it. Everything, her future, their child's future, the possibility of something she was afraid to name, hung in the balance of whatever he was about to say. "I need to tell you something," Michael began, his eyes fixed on his hands rather than her face. "About why I reacted the way I did that morning, why I was so cruel." "Michael, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." He looked up and Emily saw pain there, raw and unguarded. "You were so trusting, so completely open with me. You gave me something precious, something you'd never given anyone else. And I panicked." Emily's throat tightened. "Because I was just a mistake you regretted." "No." The word came out fierce, definitive. "Because I'm 42 years old, and I've never felt anything as real as what happened between us that night. Because you made me feel things I didn't know I was capable of, and it terrified me." The admission hung between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Emily felt tears threatening, not of sadness, but of something dangerously close to hope. "I convinced myself that I was protecting you," Michael continued, his voice gaining strength, "that the best thing I could do was cut you loose before you got tangled up in my complicated life. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from feeling too much, from wanting something I didn't think I deserved." And now, Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Michael reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers with tentative warmth. "Now I think I've been an idiot. Now I think that maybe you're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I've been too scared and stupid to see it." Emily's heart soared, then immediately crash-landed as reality reasserted itself. "Michael, nothing's changed. I'm still 19. I'm still your former employee. I'm still pregnant with a baby you didn't plan or want. You're wrong about one thing, Michael said, his hand covering hers completely. I do want this baby. I want you. I want the chance to prove that I can be the man you believed I was that night. What are you saying? Michael took a deep breath, the gesture of a man diving off a cliff with no certainty of what lay below. I'm saying I want to marry you, Emily. I want to give our child a name and a family and all the stability I can provide. I want to wake up next to you every morning and try to deserve the trust you place in me. Emily pulled her hand back as if his touch burned. Marriage. Michael, you barely know me. We shared one night and a dinner conversation. You don't build a marriage on that. Then we'll build it on everything that comes after, Michael said urgently. Emily, I know this is fast. I know it's not the fairy tale you probably dreamed of as a little girl. But I also know that I've never met anyone who challenges me the way you do, who makes me want to be better than I am. And when the novelty wears off, Emily asked, her voice thick with tears, when you realize that I don't fit into your world, that I don't know which fork to use at fancy dinners or how to make small talk with your business associates, when you start resenting the scandal and the gossip and the way people look at us. Michael was quiet for a moment, considering her words with the seriousness they deserved. Then I'll remember that none of those things matter as much as the way you make me feel alive for the first time in years. And I'll work every day to make sure you never regret taking a chance on us. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical force. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately to grab onto the possibility of love and security and a father for a child. But another part, the part raised on practical Midwestern values, knew that desire alone wasn't enough to build a life on. I need time, she said finally, to think, to pray about it, to figure out if what you're offering is real or just guilt dressed up as romance. Michael nodded, though she could see the disappointment in his eyes. How much time? I don't know, Emily admitted. But Michael, if we do this, if we try to make a marriage work, I need your promise that it won't just be about the baby. I won't be a charity case you married to do the right thing. Emily, look at me. When she opened her eyes, Michael's gaze was steady and sure. What I feel for you has nothing to do with charity and everything to do with the fact that you've turned my entire world upside down in the best possible way. The baby is part of our story, but it's not the whole story. As they left the coffee shop together, walking slowly through the autumn afternoon, Emily felt the first stirrings of something she was afraid to call hope. The future remained uncertain, fraught with complications and challenges she could barely imagine. But for the first time since that devastating morning 7 weeks ago, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, love could be enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. Emily's decision to seek counsel from Father Martinez at the campus chapel surprised even herself. She'd never been particularly devout, had attended church more out of family tradition than personal conviction, but something about Michael's proposal had awakened a need for guidance beyond her own uncertain wisdom. The chapel was quiet in the late afternoon, autumn light filtering through stained glass windows to paint the wooden pews in jewel colors. Father Martinez, a gentleman in his 60s, who'd spent decades counseling students through various crises, listened without judgment as Emily told him everything. The night with Michael, the pregnancy, the proposal that felt both like salvation and temptation. You're afraid, he observed when she finished, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone who'd heard countless confessions of human frailty. Terrified, Emily corrected, Father, I've made so many mistakes already. How do I know I'm not about to make another one? Tell me about this fear, Father. Martinez said, settling back in his chair. What specifically frightens you about marrying this man? Emily was quiet, for a moment, organizing thoughts that had been swirling chaotically for days. I'm afraid he's offering marriage because he feels obligated to, not because he truly loves me. I'm afraid that once the guilt fades, he'll see me for what I really am, a small-town girl who got in over her head. And what do you believe you deserve, Emily? The question caught her off guard. I don't know anymore. I used to think I knew exactly what my life would look like. Finish college, teach school, marry someone from home, raise children in the same church where I was baptized. Simple, safe. And now I'm carrying the child of a man I barely know but might love, considering a marriage that could either be a blessing or a disaster, and I can't tell the difference between God's plan and my own wishful thinking. Father Martinez smiled. Gently. Perhaps that's because they're not always mutually exclusive. Emily, you speak of Michael as if he's the only one taking a risk in this situation. But you're 19 years old, pregnant, and considering marriage to a man with wealth and power you've never known. Isn't it possible that your fear comes not from his motivations, but from your own worthiness? The insight hit like a physical blow, forcing Emily to confront truth she'd been avoiding. Was she really afraid that Michael didn't love her, or was she afraid that she wasn't lovable enough to sustain his interest once the novelty wore off? Pray about it. Father Martinez advises there. Session ended. But also listen to your heart. Sometimes God speaks to us through the very longings we're afraid to trust. Meanwhile, Michael was fighting his own battles with doubt and determination. The week since his proposal had stretched like a year, each day bringing new complications as he tried to imagine how their drastically different worlds might merge. His lawyer, Richard Beaumont, had been blunt in his assessment of the potential legal and social ramifications of marrying Emily, a 42-year-old businessman marrying his pregnant 19-year-old former housekeeper. Richard shook his head grimly. Michael, the media will have a field day. Your business relationships could suffer. Your social standing will definitely take a hit. And if this goes badly, she could end up with significant financial claims against your estate. I'm not worried about the money, Michael said, pacing the length of Richard's office. Well, you should be. And what about the age difference? In 10 years, she'll be 29 and you'll be 52. In 20 years? In 20 years, we'll either have built something real together or we won't, Michael interrupted. But I won't know unless I try. Richard studied his client with the careful attention of someone who'd watched Michael navigate business deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. This isn't a merger you can negotiate, Michael. This is a young woman with her own thoughts and feelings and plans for the future. What if she decides she doesn't want her life after all? The question haunted Michael as he drove home through the Chicago twilight. What if Emily said no? What if she decided that the risks outweighed the potential rewards? That his world was too foreign, too complicated, too far from everything she'd known. For the first time in his adult life, Michael faced the possibility of losing something he desperately wanted without any ability to control the outcome. No amount of money or influence could guarantee Emily's love. No business strategy could overcome the fundamental uncertainties of human emotion. That evening, Emily walked the familiar streets of her neighborhood, her mind churning with Father Martinez's words and her own contradictory impulses. She found herself standing outside a small Catholic church, its doors open for evening mass, the sound of hymns drifting into the cool night air. Without fully deciding to do so, Emily stepped inside and slipped into a back pew. The service was in Spanish, the congregation mostly elderly immigrants whose weathered faces spoke of lives built on faith and hard work. She couldn't understand the words, but the reverence in their voices, the certainty of their worship filled her with a strange peace. As the priest raised the communion host, Emily found herself praying with intensity she hadn't felt since childhood, not for a specific outcome, but for the wisdom to recognize the right path when it appeared before her. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and she glanced down to see Michael's name. I know you need time to decide, but I want you to know that whatever you choose, I respect it. You've already given me more than I had any right to expect. Emily stared at the message, reading it twice, then 3 times. There was no pressure in his words, no manipulation or guilt, just a simple acknowledgement of her autonomy and his gratitude. It was, she realized, exactly what someone who truly cared about her would say. After Mass, Emily stood outside the church as parishioners filed past her, their conversations a musical blend of Spanish and accented English. An elderly woman paused beside her, her eyes kind but curious. "It taping. Mika," she asked in heavily accented English, "are you okay?" "I'm trying to make a difficult decision," Emily replied, surprised by her own honesty. The woman nodded as if this explained everything. "El corazón sabe," she said. "Simply, the heart knows. Sometimes we just need to be brave enough to listen." As Emily walked home, the woman's words echoed in her mind. The heart knows. But which voice was her heart? The one urging caution and self-protection, or the one whispering that love was worth the risk? Back in his penthouse, Michael stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. The view that had once represented his triumph over a modest upbringing now felt like a barrier between him and the life he truly wanted. He thought about Emily's face when she told him about the pregnancy. Frightened but resolute, vulnerable but strong. He thought about her fierce protectiveness of their unborn child, her refusal to take the easy way out he'd offered. Most of all, he thought about the way she'd looked at him that first night, as if he were someone worthy of her trust. Maybe that was what love really was. Not just wanting someone, but wanting to become the person they believed you could be. The call came on a Thursday morning while Emily was attempting to study for her developmental psychology exam. The words swimming before her eyes as morning sickness made concentration nearly impossible. Jessica handed her the phone with a worried expression. Emily's mother never called during school hours unless something was wrong. "Emily, sweetheart." Mary Johnson's voice carried the warmth of Kansas wheat fields and Sunday morning church bells. But underneath lurked a tremor of concern. "I know you're busy with your studies, but your father and I have been worried. Your letters have been so brief lately, and you missed our usual Sunday call last week." Emily's stomach clenched, with guilt and nausea in equal measure. "I'm sorry, Mom. It's just been busy. Here, midterms and work and everything. Are you eating enough? You sound tired." If only you knew, Emily thought, pressing a hand to her abdomen where their grandchild was growing, invisible, but increasingly real with each passing day. "I'm fine, Mom." "Really? Well, we have some news that might cheer you up. Mrs. Henderson at the school board mentioned that they'll be looking for a new third-grade teacher next fall. She specifically asked about you, said she remembered what a bright student you were." Emily's heart sank. The teaching position she dreamed of since childhood, the neat trajectory back to Meadowbrook that had sustained her through homesickness and financial struggles, suddenly felt like a path that no longer fit her feet. That's wonderful news," she managed. "I thought you'd be more excited," Mary said, her maternal intuition detecting something amiss despite the distance between them. "Emily, is everything all right? You seem different lately." Distant. Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of her secrets like stones in her chest. Her parents had raised her to be honest, to share both struggles and joys with a family that loved her unconditionally. But how could she explain that their little girl, their pride and joy, who'd left for the big city with such high hopes, had fallen so far from the path they taught her to walk? "I'm fine, Mom," she repeated, the lie tasting bitter on her tongue. "I should probably get back to studying. Give my love to Dad." After hanging up, Emily sat in the silence of her apartment. Jessica, having left for class with concerned backward glance. The conversation with her mother had crystallized something she'd been avoiding. Whatever decision she made about Michael's proposal would have consequences that rippled far beyond Chicago. If she married Michael, how would she explain it to her parents? How could she introduce them to the sophisticated businessman who'd gotten their teenage daughter pregnant? If she refused a proposal and raised a child alone, how would she support herself and finish school? How would she face her hometown's judgment when she returned with a baby and no husband. Her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. Thinking of you. How are you feeling today? The simple message of concern, which had become a daily routine since his proposal, brought tears to her eyes. Despite his wealth and power, despite the vast differences in their backgrounds, Michael had begun to feel like the most genuine person in her increasingly complicated world. Across town, Michael was dealing with complications of his own. Word of his changed behavior had begun to circulate through Chicago's tight-knit business community. His distraction in meetings, his uncharacteristic absence from social events, his general air of a man wrestling with personal demons. Michael, we need to talk. Amanda, his ex-wife, had appeared in his office unannounced, her perfectly styled blonde hair and designer suit a reminder of the polished life he'd once thought he wanted. People are starting to ask questions. What kind of questions? Michael asked, though he could guess, about your recent instability. Richard Beaumont mentioned you're considering some kind of personal decision that could affect your business reputation. Amanda settled into the chair across from his desk with a proprietary air of someone who'd once shared his name. Please tell me you're not having some kind of midlife crisis involving an inappropriate relationship. Michael's jaw tightened. My personal life is no longer your concern, Amanda. It is when it affects a financial settlement you're still paying me, she replied. Coolly. Michael, I don't know what's going on, but you need to think carefully before you do something that could jeopardize everything you've built. After Amanda left, Michael found himself staring at the framed photo on his desk, a pictured construction site where his first major project had broken ground 12 years ago. He remembered the pride he'd felt that day, the sense that he was building something lasting, something that would define his legacy. Now, he wondered if legacy was really about buildings and bank accounts, or if it was something more fundamental, the capacity to love, to protect, to create life rather than just manipulate it. His phone rang, interrupting his brooding. The caller ID showed Emily's number, and Michael's heart immediately accelerated. Emily, is everything okay? I need to see you, she said, her voice strained in a way that sent alarm bells through his system. Can you meet me at the park, the one where we had lunch? I'll be right there. Michael found Emily sitting on a bench overlooking the lake, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The autumn wind whipped her orb and hair around her face, and she looked impossibly young and fragile against the backdrop of the city skyline. What's wrong? He asked, settling beside her, with careful attention to her body language. I talked to my mother today, Emily said, without preamble. She told me about a teaching job back home, asked why I seemed distant lately, wanted to know if I was eating enough. Her laugh was hollow, brittle, if she only knew. Michael felt something cold settle in his stomach. Are you reconsidering the baby? The pregnancy? No, Emily said, quickly, her hand moving instinctively to her abdomen. Never that. But, Michael, I keep thinking about what happens next, regardless of what I decide about your proposal. How do I explain any of this? To my parents? How do I go home for Christmas pregnant and unmarried? How do I introduce you to people who still think holding hands before engagement is scandalous? Michael was quiet for a moment, processing the full scope of Emily's dilemma. He'd been so focused on convincing her to marry him that he hadn't fully considered the personal cost she'd pay either way. We could tell them together. He offered, I could come with you to Kansas, meet your parents, explain that I love you and want to take care of you and the baby. And what exactly would you explain? Emily's voice carried a note of desperation. That you're 42 and I'm 19. That you were my boss when this happened. That we've known each other for a matter of months. But somehow that's enough to build a marriage on. I'd explain that sometimes love doesn't follow the timeline we expect, Michael said firmly. That sometimes the heart recognizes what the mind takes longer to accept. Emily turned to look at him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you really believe that? Or are you just saying What do you think I need to hear? Michael reached for her hands, noting how cold they were, despite the mild afternoon. Emily, I've spent my entire adult life making calculated decisions based on risk assessment and potential outcomes. Marrying you doesn't make sense by any traditional measure. You're young. I'm not. You're idealistic. I'm cynical. You come from a world I barely understand. And I come from one that might devour you alive. Emily's heart sank. But, Michael continued, but for the first time in my life, I don't care about the calculations. I care about waking up every morning with the chance to see you smile. I care about holding our child and knowing that we created something beautiful together, even if it started in circumstances neither of us planned. I care about becoming the man you believe that could be that first night. And my parents, the scandal, the age difference, will figure it out. Together, Michael said simply, all of it. But Emily, I need you to know that whatever challenges we face, we don't have to face them alone anymore. As they sat together on the bench, watching the sun set over Lake Michigan, Emily felt something shift inside her chest, not the flutter of morning sickness, but something deeper, the recognition that perhaps love really was about choosing to believe in someone despite the risks, about building a future on faith rather than certainty. The charity gala was everything Emily had imagined and more, a glittering showcase of Chicago's elite, held in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbow prisms across designer gowns and perfectly tailored tuxedos. She stood at Michael's side, her hand resting lightly on his arm, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. The dress Michael had insisted on buying her was simple but elegant, deep emerald silk that complemented her eyes and skimmed her figure without revealing the slight changes pregnancy had begun to make. She practiced walking in the matching heels for hours, determined not to embarrass herself or Michael in front of his peers. You look beautiful, Michael murmured as they entered the ballroom, his voice carrying genuine admiration and pride. I look terrified, Emily replied, her smile bright but brittle. That too, Michael agreed with a gentle squeeze of her hand, but beautifully terrified. The decision to attend the gala together had been Michael's idea, a public declaration of their relationship that would, as he put it, get the inevitable gossip over with all at once. Emily had agreed, partly out of loyalty, and partly out of a need to understand exactly what she was considering joining. The whispers began almost immediately. Is that Michael Thompson with that young woman? She can't be more than 20. I heard she used to work for him. Rather sudden, isn't it? They've never been seen together before. Emily's cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she kept her chin high and her expression serene, drawing on reserves of Midwestern politeness her mother had drilled into her since childhood. Beside her, Michael moved through the crowd with his usual confidence, introducing her to business associates and social acquaintances with a possessive pride that both thrilled and terrified her. Michael, darling. The voice was Hunya with an underlying edge of steel. Amanda Thompson, Michael's ex-wife, approached with the predatory grace of a woman who'd learned to use beauty as a weapon. How lovely to see you here. And this must be your friend. The pause before. Friend was calculated to wound, and Emily felt the blow even as she extended her hand with practiced courtesy. Emily Johnson, it's nice to meet you. Amanda's handshake was brief and dismissive, her pale blue eyes cataloging every detail of Emily's appearance with surgical precision. How refreshing. Michael usually brings such sophisticated companions to these events. Emily is plenty sophisticated, Michael said, his voice carrying a warning that Amanda chose to ignore. Oh, I'm sure she is in her own way. Amanda's smile was brilliant and cruel. Tell me, dear, what do you do? Besides keeping Michael entertained, of course. Emily felt Michael tense beside her, ready to intervene, but something in Amanda's condescending tone awakened a steel core Emily hadn't known she possessed. I'm studying elementary education at DePal, Emily replied evenly. I want to teach children from underprivileged backgrounds. Give them the same chances. I had growing up in a small town where everyone believed in everyone else's potential. The response was perfectly pitched, humble enough to avoid seeming pretentious, but carrying an implicit criticism of the shallow charity work that occupied most of the women in this room. Amanda's smile faltered slightly. "How noble," she said finally. "I do hope you'll be able to finish your studies. Advanced education can be so demanding." "I intend to finish," Emily said simply. "Some things are worth fighting for." As Amanda drifted away to find easier prey, Michael looked at Emily with something approaching awe. "That was masterfully done. I had good teachers," Emily replied, thinking of her parents and their quiet dignity in the face of small-town gossip and judgment. "My mother always said that grace under pressure was the mark of true breeding." The evening progressed with a mixture of triumphs and trials. Emily charmed a prominent philanthropist with her passion for education reform, held her own in a conversation about urban development with a city councilman, and gracefully deflected increasingly personal questions about her relationship with Michael. But the constant scrutiny was exhausting. Each interaction attested her worthiness to stand beside Michael in his world. By the time they escaped to the hotel's rooftop terrace for air, Emily felt wrung out and emotionally raw. "I'm sorry," Michael said immediately, noting her pallor in the moonlight. "This was too much, too soon. I should have prepared you better." "It's not that," Emily said, though it partially was. "It's just they all know Michael. They can see exactly what this is. A powerful man with his much younger mistress. And they're all waiting to see how long it takes before you get tired of the novelty. What they think doesn't matter," Michael said fiercely. "Doesn't it?" Emily turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your ex-wife made it very clear that I'm exactly what everyone expected, young, naive, temporary. What happens when you start seeing me through their eyes?" Michael cooped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Emily, listen to me. I've been part of this world for 20 years. I know exactly how shallow and judgmental it can be, but I also know that what we have is real, regardless of what anyone else thinks." "How can you be so certain?" "Because you're the only person who's ever made me question whether the life I built was worth living," Michael said simply. "Because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want something more than success or approval or the right address on my business cards." Emily searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or calculation. Instead, she found only sincerity and something that might have been vulnerability. "Michael, I need to tell you something," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About my decision, about us." Michael's heart stopped. "What about it?" Emily took a deep breath, gathering courage for words that would change. "Everything. I've been afraid of the wrong things. I've been so worried about what other people would think about, whether I'm sophisticated enough or worldly enough, that I almost forgot the most important question, which is whether I love you enough to take the risk." Emily's smile was tremulous but real. "And I do, Michael. I love you enough to marry you, to build a life with you, to face whatever comes next together." Michael's response was immediate and physical. He pulled her into his arms with desperate relief, his lips finding hers in a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. Around them, the Chicago skyline glittered like a constellation of dreams. And for the first time since that devastating morning 9 weeks ago, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe fairy tales could come true, even when they began with scandal and uncertainty. "Are you certain?" Michael asked when they finally broke apart, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm terrified," Emily admitted. "But yes, I'm certain. The question is, are you ready to marry someone who still has so much to learn about your world?" "Our world," Michael corrected. "And Emily, I'm hoping you'll teach me as much as I teach you." The engagement announcement appeared in the Chicago Tribune Society Section 3. Days later, a formal notice that sent shockwaves through both Michael's professional circles and Emily's small world. The phone calls began immediately, starting with David Chen's concerned congratulations and escalating to increasingly intrusive inquiries from reporters who'd caught wind of the age difference and unusual circumstances. Emily stared at the newspaper clipping Jessica had brought home, the black and white text making their decision feel suddenly official and irreversible. Thompson Construction CEO Michael Thompson announces his engagement to Emily Johnson, a student at DePaul University. The couple plans a winter wedding. 53 words, Emily murmured. Our entire relationship reduced to 53 words. At least they didn't mention your age. Jessica offered, though her expression remained troubled. Are you sure about this? I mean, really sure? Because once you're married to someone like him, there's no going back to being just Emily from Kansas. I stopped being just Emily from Kansas the moment I slept with him. Emily replied with a rueful smile. The question now is whether I can become Emily Thompson without losing myself in the process. Meanwhile, Michael was fielding his own concerned interventions. Richard Beaumont had arrived unannounced with a prenuptial agreement draft that read like a business merger rather than a marriage contract. Its standard protection, Richard insisted, spreading the documents across Michael's conference table. Assets acquired before marriage remain separate. Specific provisions for spousal support clauses regarding business interests. No, Michael's voice was flat, final. Michael, be reasonable. You're worth close to $50 million. She's 19 years old with no assets to speak of. At least protect yourself from what? From the woman I love having claim, to the life we're building together. Michael's anger was controlled but unmistakable. Richard, either draw up a standard marriage license or find yourself a new client. And if it doesn't work out, if in 5 years she decides she wants half of everything you've built. Michael was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Then, she'll have earned it because if I'm lucky enough to have 5 years with Emily, whatever she takes will be worth less than what she's given me. The conversation he'd been dreading came that evening. Emily had insisted they call her parents together to break the news properly before rumors reached Meadowbrook through the extended network of small-town connections. Emily's hand shook as she dialed a familiar number. Michael's presence beside her on the couch, both comforting and nerve-wracking. The phone rang twice. Before father's growly voice answered. Johnson residence. Dad, it's Emily. Is Mom there? I have something I need to tell you both. The conference call feature on Michael's phone had never felt more fraught with possibility for disaster. When both parents were on the line, Emily took a deep breath and dove into the deep end. Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something important. I'm getting married. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could picture her parents in their small kitchen, her mother's hand pressed to her heart, her father's weathered face creased with confusion. Married, Mary. Johnson's voice was faint. Sweetheart, you never mentioned you were even dating someone. It happened quickly, Emily said, the understatement of the century. Mom, Dad, I'd like you to meet Michael Thompson. He's here with me, Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. Michael's voice was carefully modulated, respectful. It's an honor to speak with you, Mr. Thompson. Robert Johnson's tone was cautious. Tell us about yourself. How did you meet our daughter? Emily and Michael exchanged a look, both remembering their careful rehearsal of this conversation. They decided on a version of the truth that emphasized a genuine connection while downplaying the more scandalous details. I met Emily through my household stuff, Michael said carefully. She was working part-time while attending college. I was immediately impressed by her character, her dedication to her studies, her values. And you're both students at DePaul? Mary asked, hope evident in her voice. No, Mom, Michael replied. I'm older than Emily. Quite a bit older, actually. I own a construction company here in Chicago. The silence stretched again, heavier. This time, how much older? Robert's voice had taken on the edge that Emily remembered from her teenage years when boys had come calling. I'm 42, Michael said simply. Emily closed her eyes, waiting for the explosion. Instead, she heard her mother's sharp intake of breath and her father's muttered exclamation. Emily Rose Johnson. Mary's voice was tight with shock and disappointment. You're 19 years old. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that I love him, Mom. Emily said, her voice steadying with conviction. I know it's not what you planned for me. I know it's not the neat, simple life you wanted for your daughter. But Michael is a good man and he loves me. And we want to build a life together, sweetheart. Robert's voice was gentler now, carrying the weight of parental concern. Love is wonderful, but marriage is about more than feelings. It's about shared values, common goals, compatible futures. What could you possibly have in common with a man twice your age? We both believe that love is worth fighting for, Emily said. We both want to create something meaningful with our lives, and we're both committed to making this work. Mr. Thompson, Mary's voice was carefully controlled. What are your intentions regarding our daughter's education? Her dreams of teaching? Mrs. Johnson, Emily's education and career goals are her own decisions, Michael replied. I support whatever path she chooses. In fact, I'm hoping she'll help me establish an educational foundation focused on underserved communities. The conversation continued for another hour, with both parents asking increasingly detailed questions about Michael's background, their timeline, their plans for the future. Through it all, Emily watched Michael feel their concerns with patience and respect, never becoming defensive or dismissive of their parental worries. When they finally hung up, Emily felt emotionally exhausted, but oddly relieved. The secret was finally out. The first major hurdle cleared. They hate the idea, she said, slumping against Michael's shoulder. They love you, Michael corrected. They're worried about you, which is what good parents do. Give them time to get used to the idea. And if they don't, Michael was quiet for a moment, considering. Then we'll prove them wrong through our actions. We'll show them that love really can bridge any gap, overcome any obstacle, even the gap between a Kansas farmer's daughter and a Chicago construction mogul, especially that one, Michael said, pulling her closer, because that's the gap that brought us together in the first place. The morning sickness had intensified to the point where Emily could barely keep water down, let alone the prenatal vitamins Dr. Sarachin had prescribed. Sitting in the sterile examination room, Emily gripped Michael's hand as they waited for the results of her blood work. Both of them worried about the baby's health, given her inability to maintain proper nutrition. Mrs. Thompson, to be Dr. E. Chun, said with a smile as she entered, carrying a thick file. I have your test results, and I think you'll be pleased. The baby's okay? Emily asked, immediately, her free hand moving protectively to her abdomen. The baby is perfectly healthy, Dr. Chen assured her, but there's something else we need to discuss. Emily, when was your last menstrual period? Emily exchanged a glance with Michael, both of them remembering the timeline they'd carefully calculated. About 12 weeks. Ago, maybe 13. Dr. Chen nodded, making notes in the file. Based on your hormone levels and the ultrasound measurements, I'd say you're actually about 14 weeks along, which means conception occurred approximately 12 weeks ago, not the 8 or 9 weeks you initially calculated. Emily felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. 12 weeks ago would have been before that night with Michael, before everything changed. That's not possible, Emily said faintly. I hadn't. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the fact that she'd been a virgin until Michael. Dr. Chin looked up from her notes, sensing the tension that had suddenly filled the room. Emily, is there something you'd like to discuss privately? I can ask Mr. Thompson to step out if no, Emily said quickly, then looked at Michael with stricken eyes. Michael, I don't understand. The timing doesn't make sense. Michael's mind was racing, trying to process the implications of what they'd just learned. If Emily was further along than they'd thought, if conception had occurred before their night together. Michael said carefully, Is it possible there was another co-encounter that Emily might not remember clearly, perhaps involving alcohol? Or absolutely not? Emily interrupted, her voice fierce, despite her confusion. Michael, I told you, you were my first, my only. There's never been anyone else. Dr. Chin looked between them with growing understanding. Emily, I think there might be some confusion about your menstrual cycle timing. Sometimes, especially with irregular periods or stress, women can mistake other bleeding for menstruation. If you were a virgin before your encounter with Mr. Thompson, then he is definitely the father. But the timing, let me show you something, Dr. Chun said, turning her computer monitor toward them. This is your ultrasound from today. The image on the screen was clearer than Emily had expected. A tiny but unmistakably human form, complete, with the beginning of limbs and facial features. But what caught her attention was the time stamp showing gestational. Age, 14 weeks, Dr. Chin confirmed, which means conception occurred right around the time you've indicated. Emily, did you experience any bleeding about 2 weeks after conception? Light spotting, that you might have mistaken for a period? Emily's eyes widened as memory clicked into place. Yes, there was light bleeding, but I thought I assumed it was just stress from everything that had happened. That was implantation. Bleeding, Dr. Chin explained gently. It's very common in early pregnancy, and many women mistake it for a light period. That's why your date seemed off. Michael felt a wave of relief so intense, it nearly knocked him over. For a moment, he'd wondered if there had been some other man, some encounter Emily had, forgotten or hidden. The thought had been like a knife in his chest. So, the baby is definitely, Emily began, conceived the night you told me about, Dr. Chin confirmed, and everything looks perfectly normal. The morning sickness should start to ease in the next few weeks, and you should be feeling much better by your second trimester. As they left the doctor's office, both Emily and Michael were quiet, processing the emotional whiplash of the last hour. The parking garage felt like a safe haven where they could finally speak freely. I thought for a moment, Michael began, then stopped, unsure how to voice his fears without sounding accusatory. You thought I'd lied to you, Emily finished. About being a virgin, about you being the father. Emily, I know, it's okay, Emily said, though her voice carried a note of hurt. I understand why you'd wonder. The timeline was confusing, and you barely know me. But Michael, I need you to understand something. I've never lied to you. Not about my past. Not about my feelings. Not about anything. Michael stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands reaching for hers. I know that. I've known it from the beginning. For just a moment, when the doctor mentioned the timing, I let doubt creep in. But Emily, even if there had been someone else, even if the circumstances were different, it wouldn't have changed how I feel about you. Really, Michael said firmly, because what we have isn't just about the baby. It's about us, who we are together, who we bring out in each other. Emily studied his face, searching for any lingering doubt. Instead, she found only sincerity and love, the same expression that had captivated her that first night. I have something else to tell you, Emily said, her voice softer now. About the baby? Michael's heart clenched. What about the baby? Emily smiled, her first genuine smile since entering the doctor's office. Dr. Chin was able to determine the sex from the ultrasound. We're having a daughter, Michael. A little girl. The words hit Michael like a revelation. A daughter? His daughter, their daughter. Suddenly, the abstract concept of baby became startlingly real. A little girl with Emily's eyes and a stubborn determination. A future that stretched out before them, filled with pink tutus and bedtime stories and first days of school. A daughter, he repeated, wonder evident in his voice. Are you disappointed? I know some men prefer sons. Disappointed? Michael pulled Emily into his arms right there in the parking garage, not caring who might see them. Emily, I'm terrified and thrilled and completely overwhelmed. A daughter means teaching someone to be strong and independent and brave. It means showing her what she deserves from the men in her life by how I treat her mother. Emily melted into his embrace, feeling the last of her fears about his commitment dissolve. This was the man she was going to marry, someone who understood that loving a daughter meant first loving her mother with the kind of respect and devotion that would set the standard for every relationship that followed. What should we name her? Emily asked, her voice muffled against his chest. Something strong, Michael replied immediately. Emily sat in the bridal boutique, surrounded by white silk, and tulle that cost more than her parents' monthly mortgage payment, trying to mediate between her mothers. Tearful insistence on something simple and appropriate, and the wedding planner Michael had hired, who spoke in terms of society expectations and proper representation. At 16 weeks pregnant, Emily's changing body had already eliminated several dress options, and the remaining choices seemed to represent two different women. The small-town girl her mother wanted her to remain, and the sophisticated wife Michael's world expected her to become. Something that reminds her every day that she comes from two people who loved each other enough to build something beautiful together against all odds. The wedding planning had become a battlefield of competing visions and wounded feelings. "This is lovely, sweetheart," Mary Johnson said, fingering a modest A-line dress with long sleeves and a high neckline. "Very appropriate for a young woman in your situation. With respect, Mrs. Johnson." Vivian Lancaster, the wedding planner, interjected with a kind of polite firmness that masked deep irritation. "This is going to be a society wedding. The dress needs to make a statement about Mrs. Thompson's place in Chicago's social hierarchy." Emily closed her eyes, feeling caught between two worlds that seemed determined to tear her apart. Her parents had arrived in Chicago 3 days ago for wedding preparations, and the culture clash had been immediate and brutal. Robert Johnson had taken one look at Michael's penthouse and asked if Emily was sure she wasn't getting in over her head with people who have more money than sense. Mary had met Michael's social circle and pronounced him lovely, I'm sure, but perhaps a bit too concerned with appearances. Meanwhile, Michael was dealing with his own family crisis. His younger sister, Patricia, had flown in from Los Angeles specifically to talk him out of what she called the most expensive midlife crisis in family history. "Michael, I understand the appeal," Patricia said as they sat in his office, her voice carrying the kind of brutal honesty only siblings could deliver. "She's young, she's beautiful, she's probably amazing in bed, but marriage to someone who doesn't even know which fork to use for salad." "Course, this isn't about forks, Patricia," Michael replied, his patience wearing thin. "It's about love, something you might recognize if you'd ever experienced it yourself." "Don't lecture me about love," Patricia shot back. "I've been married to the same man for 15 years. We built our relationship on common ground, shared experiences, compatible goals. What do you and Emily have besides sexual attraction and an unplanned pregnancy?" The question hit closer to home than Michael cared to admit. Over the past weeks, as the reality of merging their lives had become increasingly complicated, he'd begun to wonder if perhaps the doubters were right. Every social event became a minefield of awkward explanations. Every interaction with Emily's parents highlighted the vast differences in their backgrounds. Every business meeting now included whispered speculation about his judgment and stability. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a simple dinner at an upscale restaurant. Michael's attempt to introduce Emily's parents to some of his closer friends. The evening had started awkwardly and deteriorated rapidly when conversation turned to current events. "I just don't understand how anyone could support those policies," said Margaret Waverly, the wife of one of Michael's biggest investors, her voice carrying the casual dismissiveness of someone accustomed to being agreed with. "It's obvious that government assistance just creates dependency instead of encouraging personal responsibility." Robert Johnson, who'd spent his entire life working multiple jobs to support his family, set down his fork with the careful precision of a man controlling his temper. Mrs. Waverly, with respect, I think you might be surprised by how hard most people work, even when they need a little help to get by. Oh, I'm sure there are exceptions, Margaret replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. But surely you have to admit that people who make better choices generally do better in life. The implication hung in the air like smoke from a fire that people like Robert and Mary Johnson, people who struggle financially despite their best efforts, had somehow made inferior choices. Emily felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, not for herself, but for her parents, who sat with quiet dignity while being patronized by people who'd never worked a day of physical labor in their lives. I think, Emily said carefully, her voice steady despite the anger building in her chest, that some people are born on third base and think they've hit a triple. The table fell silent. Margaret's smile faltered, and Michael felt his heart stop as he realized Emily had just insulted one of his most important business relationships. I beg your pardon. Margaret's voice was ice cold. I think you heard me clearly, Emily replied, her Midwestern politeness unable to disguise the steel in her tone. Some people confuse privilege with virtue. The dinner ended shortly after with stilted goodbyes and promises to get together again soon that everyone knew were lies. Michael's friends left with barely concealed shock, Emily's parents with quiet embarrassment, and Emily herself with the growing realization that perhaps she really didn't belong in Michael's world after all. Back at the penthouse, the confrontation that had been building for weeks finally erupted. What were you thinking? Michael's voice was controlled, but Emily could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. I was thinking that I couldn't sit there and watch them condescend to my parents anymore, Emily replied, her own anger finally finding its voice. Those people were insulting everything my family stands for, and you just sat there like it was normal. It is normal, Michael said, then immediately regretted the words. Emily stared at him as if he'd slapped her. Normal? It's normal for your friends to imply that people who struggle financially are somehow morally inferior. That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Michael? Emily's voice rose, all the frustration and doubt of the past weeks pouring out. Because it sounded like you were saying that your world is more important than mine, that I should just smile and nod, while people like Margaret Waverly dismiss my parents as failures. Michael ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of impossible expectations. Emily, Margaret Waverly's husband, controls 40% of my commercial investments. To insulting her could cost me millions of dollars and dozens of jobs for my employees. And that matters more than standing up for what's right. Sometimes in the real world, you have to pick your battles, Michael said, his voice harder now. Sometimes you have to smile and be diplomatic even when you disagree with people. The real world? Emily's laugh was bitter. Michael, what do you think my world has been? You think growing up in a family that had to choose between fixing the car and buying winter coats isn't the real world. You think working 3 jobs to pay for college isn't real? That's not what I meant. Yes, it is, Emily said, tears streaming down her face now. It's exactly what you meant. You think your world is the real one, the one that matters, and mine is just some quaint little existence that doesn't count when it conflicts with your business interests. The accusation hung between them like a chasm, revealing the fault lines that had been building beneath their relationship since the beginning. Michael looked at Emily, this fierce, principled woman he'd fallen in love with, and saw the hurt in her eyes, the growing realization that perhaps love really wasn't enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. Emily, he said softly, reaching for her. She stepped back, shaking her head. No, Michael, I think we both need to admit what's been obvious from the beginning. We don't belong together. We come from different worlds. We have different values, and no amount of love is going to change that. You don't mean that, don't I? Emily's voice was steady now, resigned. Michael, I love you. I love you so much it hurts. But I can't spend the rest of my life pretending to be someone I'm not. And you can't spend yours defending choices that compromise everything you've built. Emily moved toward the bedroom, her movements careful and deliberate. I'm going to pack my things. I'll stay with Jessica until I can figure out what to do next. Emily, please. The baby will always be yours, she said without turning around. But I can't marry you, Michael. We both deserve better than a marriage built on the hope that love will be enough when everything else tears us apart. 3 months had passed since Emily walked out of Michael's penthouse. 3 months during which she'd returned to Meadowbrook and tried to rebuild a life from the wreckage of her shattered dreams. The small Kansas town embraced her with the quiet compassion that rural communities reserve for their own, asking no questions about her growing belly or the pain that shadowed her eyes. She'd taken a job at the local library, her college credits enough to qualify her for assistant librarian, while she completed her degree through correspondence courses. The work was peaceful, mindful, cataloging books and helping children with homework, while her daughter grew stronger inside her. At 24 weeks pregnant, Emily's condition was impossible to hide, but Meadowbrook had simply adjusted its expectations without drama or judgment. Michael, meanwhile, had thrown himself into work with the desperate intensity of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. Thompson Construction had secured 3 major contracts in the past quarter, expanding into markets Michael had never considered before. But success fell hollow without Emily to share it with, and the empty penthouse echoed with memories of her laughter and quiet presence. The call came on a Tuesday evening as Emily sat on her parents' front porch, watching the Kansas sunset paint the wheat fields gold. Dr. Chen's voice carried concern that made Emily's blood run cold. Emily, I need you to come in for additional testing. The ultrasound showed some irregularities that require immediate attention. What kind of irregularities? Emily's hand moved protectively to her belly, where her daughter had been remarkably active that day. It's probably nothing serious, but there are some markers that suggest possible complications. How soon can you get to Chicago? Emily closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on her. Chicago meant facing Michael, confronting the life she'd walked away from, risking the fragile peace she'd built in Meadowbrook. But it also meant the best possible care for her daughter. I'll be there tomorrow, she said. The train ride to Chicago felt like traveling through time, each mile bringing Emily closer to the world she'd fled and the man she'd never stopped loving. Her reflection in the window showed the changes 3 months had wrought. Her face fuller, her body obviously pregnant, her eyes holding a maturity that hadn't been there before. Dr. Chen's office was exactly as Emily remembered, but the ultrasound results were not what she'd expected. The good news is that your daughter is perfectly healthy, Dr. Chen said, adjusting the monitor so Emily could see the remarkable detail of her child's face. The concerning markers we discussed have resolved themselves. However, there is something else we need to address. Emily's heart clenched. What is it? You're showing signs of preeclampsia, elevated blood pressure, protein in your urine. It's manageable, but it requires careful monitoring and potentially early delivery. Emily, you need to be near a major medical facility for the remainder of your pregnancy. The diagnosis hit Emily like a physical blow. Preeclampsia could threaten both her life and her daughter's, requiring the kind of specialized care that simply wasn't available in Meadowbrook. She would have to return to Chicago, would have to face the life she'd rejected. There's something else, Dr. Chun continued gently. I took the liberty of calling Mr. Thompson when we scheduled this appointment. He's listed as your emergency contact, and given the circumstances, he's here. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. He's been here for 6 hours. Dr. Chen replied with a small smile. Emily, I don't know the details of your situation, but that man has called my office every week since you left, asking about your health and the baby's development. Whatever happened between you, his concern for both of you is genuine. Emily found Michael in the hospital waiting room, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled from hours of worry. His head was in his hands, and when he looked up at the sound of her footsteps, Emily saw vulnerability in his eyes that took her breath away. Emily. Her name escaped. His lips like a prayer, like an apology, like a promise, all at once. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the sterile space. 3 months of separation and heartbreak stretching between them like an ocean. Emily took in the changes in his appearance, the new lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders seemed to carry a heavier burden, the wedding ring he still wore on his right hand despite their broken engagement. Dr. Chin said you've been calling. Emily said softly, one hand resting on her rounded belly where their daughter kicked, as if sensing her father's presence. Every week, Michael admitted, rising slowly from his chair. I needed to know you were both okay. I needed to know that my pride and stupidity hadn't cost me the two most important people in my world. Emily's resolve, carefully constructed over 3 months of telling herself she'd made the right choice, began to crumble. Michael, nothing's changed. We're still from different worlds. We still want different things. No, Michael interrupted, stepping closer. Everything's changed. I've changed. Emily, these past 3 months without you have been the longest of my life. Every success felt meaningless. Every achievement hollow. I realize that I've been so focused on building a life that looked impressive from the outside that I forgot to build one that actually mattered. What are you saying? Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A real estate listing that made Emily's heart skip. It was a farmhouse in Meadowbrook, Kansas, complete with white picket fence and a red barn that needed painting. I've been researching rural development projects, Michael said, his voice gaining confidence. Did you know that small towns across the Midwest are desperate for infrastructure, improvements, better schools, updated municipal buildings, affordable housing for young families? Emily stared at the listing, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. You bought a house in Meadowbrook. I made an offer, Michael corrected, contingent on the approval of the woman I love and the daughter we're going to raise together. Emily, I don't need Chicago society events and business dinners with people who think money makes them better than others. I need you. I need our family. I need the chance to build something real in a place where character matters more than net worth. Tears streamed down Emily's face as the full implications of what he was saying sank in. You'd give up everything? Your business, your life here? I'm not giving up anything, Michael said, moving close enough to touch her face with gentle fingers. I'm gaining everything that actually matters. Thompson Construction can operate from anywhere. In fact, there's probably more honest work to be done in small towns than in cities where everything's about who you know and which palms you grease. But your friends, your reputation. My friends will either accept the woman I love or they were never really friends to begin with, Michael said firmly. And as for my reputation, I'd rather be known as a man who was smart enough to marry Emily Johnson than the successful businessman who was too proud to admit when he was wrong. Emily searched his face, looking for any sign that this was another impulsive decision he might regret later. Instead, she found the same sincerity that had captivated her from their first real conversation, now tempered with hard-won wisdom. Preeclampsia, she said, voicing her remaining fear. Dr. Chin says I need to stay near a major medical facility. Then we'll stay in Chicago until after the baby's born, Michael replied, without hesitation. We'll get married here with your parents, and whatever friends you want present. No society, wedding, no guest list politics, just us promising to love each other for the rest of our lives. And then when our daughter is safely here, and you're both healthy, we'll go home to Kansas and build the life we should have planned. From the beginning, Emily felt the last of her resistance melt away. This wasn't the Michael who'd been more concerned about business relationships than standing up for what was right. This was a man who'd learned to prioritize love over appearances, family over status, real connection over surface sophistication. Are you sure? She whispered. Really sure? Because I can't go through losing you again. Michael's answer was to pull her into his arms, careful of her pregnant belly, and hold her with the desperate relief of a man who'd found his way back to the only home that mattered. Emily, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you. Not because you're carrying my child, not because I feel obligated to, but because you're the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. You make me want to be a better man, not for appearances or profit, but because you deserve the very best version of myself. As they held each other in the hospital waiting room, Emily felt their daughter kick vigorously, as if approving of her parents' reunion. Around them, the busy hospital continued its rhythm of life and healing. But for Emily and Michael, time seemed suspended in a bubble of possibility and promise. I love you too, Emily whispered against his chest. I never stopped loving you, even when I thought we were impossible. We're not impossible, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. We're just complicated. But the best things in life usually are. Dr. Chin found them like that. 20 minutes later, still holding each other as if afraid the other might disappear, she smiled at the obvious. Reconciliation. Having seen enough couples through medical crisis to recognize real love when she encountered it. I hate to interrupt, she said gently, but we need to discuss Emily's care plan, and Mr. Thompson, I believe you had some questions about the birthing process. Emily looked up at Michael in surprise. You've been asking about labor and delivery. Michael's cheeks wrinkled slightly. I wanted to understand what you'd be going through. I figure if I was going to be your partner in this, I should know what I was signing up for. The simple statement, so different from his earlier assumptions about what the relationship would look like, brought fresh tears to Emily's eyes. This time they were tears of joy. 2 weeks later, Emily stood in the small chapel of St. Mary's Catholic Church in Meadowbrook, wearing her grandmother's pearl earrings and a simple ivory dress that accommodated her 7-month pregnancy. The guest list was small. Her parents, Michael's sister, Patricia, who'd flown in from Los Angeles with a surprisingly heartfelt apology, Jessica from Chicago, and a handful of Emily's childhood friends who'd known her since grade school. Michael stood at the altar in a simple black suit, no designer label or society pretensions, looking more handsome than Emily had ever seen him. When Father Murphy asked if he took Emily to be his wife, Michael's voice rang clear and strong through the small church. I do. I take Emily not just as my wife, but as my partner, my equal, my best friend, and the love of my life. I promise to honor her dreams as much as my own, to support her goals even when they challenge mine, and to never again forget that the richest man in the world is the one who's loved by a woman like Emily Johnson. Emily's vows were equally heartfelt. Michael, I take you not because you can provide for me, but because you see me as I truly am and love me anyway. I promise to challenge you when you need challenging, support you when you need support, and never let you forget that true wealth is measured in love, not dollars. When they kissed to seal their marriage, the small congregation erupted in applause, but Emily barely heard it. Her entire world had narrowed to the man holding her, the life they were building together, and the daughter, who would arrive in just 2 months to complete their unconventional family. The reception was held in the church fellowship hall with Mary Johnson's famous apple pie instead of a wedding cake, and Robert Johnson's heartfelt toast about the importance of finding someone who makes you want to be better than you are. I'll admit, Robert said, raising his glass of sweet tea. When Emily first told us about Michael, I had my doubts. He's from a different world than ours, with different experiences and different challenges. But watching them together these past weeks, seeing how he looks at my daughter like she's the most precious thing in creation, I know that Emily chose well. Love isn't about finding someone exactly like you. It's about finding someone who complements who you are and inspires who you want to become. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift home, Emily and Michael sat on the church steps, watching the Kansas stars emerge in the clear country sky Emily's head rested on Michael's shoulder, her hand in his, their wedding rings catching the moonlight. "No. Regrets?" Emily asked softly. "Only one," Michael replied, then smiled at her, worried expression. "I regret that it took me so long to realize that this, you, me, our family, is worth more than any business deal or social connection I've ever made. And you're really ready to live in Meadowbrook? Population 124. Now that you're officially a resident?" Michael laughed, the sound rich and free in the prairie night. "Emily, I spent 20 years building a life that looked successful from the outside, but felt empty on the inside. I'm ready to spend the next 20 building something real with a woman I love in a place where people still believe in the things that actually matter." 3 weeks later, Sophia Rose Thompson made her dramatic entrance into the world 2 weeks early, arriving via emergency cesarean when Emily's blood pressure spiked dangerously. Michael was in the delivery room holding Emily's hand and whispering encouragement as their daughter fought her way into existence with typical Thompson determination and Johnson stubbornness. When Dr. Chin placed a tiny, perfect baby on Emily's chest, both parents cried at the overwhelming beauty of what they created together. Sophia had Michael's dark hair and Emily's green eyes, and when she wrapped her impossibly small fingers around Michael's thumb, he felt his heart expand in ways he'd never imagined possible. "She's perfect," Emily whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Just like her mother," Michael replied, kissing Emily's forehead with infinite tenderness. 1 year later, the Thompson family was settled in their renovated farmhouse in Meadowbrook, where Emily taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school, and Michael ran his construction company from a converted barn office. Thompson Construction had become the go-to firm for rural development projects across 3 states, building affordable housing, updating schools, and improving infrastructure in small towns that had been forgotten by larger companies. On a warm spring evening, as Emily nursed baby Sophia on the front porch while Michael worked in the garden they'd planted together, she reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. "Do you think she'll understand someday?" Emily asked, nodding toward their daughter. "How we met, all the complications and mistakes and near misses that brought us together." Michael looked up from the tomato plants. He was staking, dirt on his hands and satisfaction in his eyes. "I think she'll understand that sometimes the best things in life begin in the most unexpected ways, and that real love, isn't about perfect circumstances or ideal timing. It's about 2 people deciding that what they have together is worth fighting for." As if summoned by her parents' conversation, Sophia opened her eyes and gazed up at Emily with the serene wisdom that babies sometimes display, as if they remember secrets from before their birth. Emily smiled down at her daughter, this perfect blend of 2 imperfect people who'd found their way to each other against all odds. "Welcome to the world, little one," Emily whispered. "Yay, you're daddy, and I have quite a story to tell you someday." Michael joined them on the porch swing, wrapping his arms around his wife and daughter as the Kansas sunset painted the sky in shades of promise. The future stretched before them, uncertain in its details, but secure in its foundation of love, respect, and the hard-won wisdom that the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth fighting for, and worth building together one day at a time. In the distance, the church bells of Meadowbrook chimed the hour, their sound carrying across the wheat fields like a benediction, like a celebration, like a reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most unlikely circumstances and end with the most extraordinary happiness. The businessman who'd once thought love was a luxury he couldn't afford had learned that it was actually the only investment that truly mattered. The small-town girl who thought she needed to change herself to fit into someone else's world had discovered that the right person would love her exactly as she was while inspiring her to become even better. Together, they built something neither could have created alone. A love that transcended differences in age, background, and circumstance to become a Testament to the transformative power of choosing each other every day, no matter what challenges arose. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next.